presenteeism, or people who are at work physically but not necessarily there in mind and spirit. So they're turning up so they don't lose their job, but in terms of the work that they're creating and the actual volume and quality of their work is average.
What's the impact?
Depends on the headcount in the organisation, but you're talking hundreds of dollars per head per year, potentially. And if you look at some of the surveys that Southern Cross has done, they take a sample of companies in New Zealand and sort of extrapolate that out across the country, it's into the billions of dollars.
In New Zealand?
Yeah, and unfortunately that number's getting worse, not better. A lot of that is down to stress.
So what's the answer to that? What's the solution?
Engagement first. And I think once you get that engagement, people are more receptive.
What does education look like?
It can be.
Richard Ellis is a personal trainer,
health, mindset and nutrition coach.
He's specialisee in burnout and restoring energy and vitality back into life.
Helping high-level executives and teams in New Zealand.
When it comes to men's health, do you see that men are active?
Not enough. I don't think men are quite as good as their female counterparts.
What are some of the quick actions that we can do right now to boost alertness?
The best thing that you can do is...
Why do we get 3 o'clock lull?
There's a couple of different components to it. One is...
You talk a lot about burnout. You've had that happen to you.
Yeah. And I was my own worst coach. It was quite a wake-up call. It's something that creeps. It's not something that just happens one day and you go, oh, I'm not feeling as energetic as I was the day before. This is quite a big mindset shift, is always keep something in the tank. One of the examples that runners use is when they're running a race, they know the distance that they're looking for. The advice is always keep 10% in the tank.
That's quite the opposite of what we hear people say. What are some of the quick actions that we can do right now to boost alertness?
Best thing that you can do is get out into daylight. It helps to get rid of that sleepiness. You know, when sometimes you wake up and you stay indoors, you can sort of still feel a little bit sleepy mid-morning because you haven't got that natural light into the eyes. So,
what about the simple way to stabilize your blood sugars and you're having constant energy throughout the day?
That doesn't mean you have to have breakfast. When I say beginning of the day is whenever your first meal is.
Is it okay not to eat breakfast?
Yep, absolutely. The cereal companies would disagree, but they're the ones that put the message out there that we all need to eat breakfast. Is getting that a consistent level of...
Quick one. Mina here. Thank you for watching this episode. I appreciate you. Thank you for all your support. One thing that you can do for me is to please hit the subscribe button below. A lot of people who come and watch this podcast or listen to the podcast are not subscribers. And so we're trying to increase our subscriber base. We are wanting to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of this year. I promise you that if you hit subscribe, I'm going to work hard to make sure that my episodes are really good, that will get better and better. So, do we have a deal? Okay, back to the episode. You talk a lot about burnout. You've had that happen to you.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It's not nice. And it's something that creeps. It's not something that just happens one day and you go, oh, I'm not feeling as energetic as I was the day before. It's a slow creep. And it wasn't until I got to the point where I was working with my mentors that I talked about 2014, 2015. We did some analysis, and part of the benefit of that process was doing some testing on cortisol, which is a hormone which some people have heard can be a negative thing. It's not a negative thing. It's a natural hormone in our body that has a very important function. But an unhealthy cortisol pattern is one of the indicators that somebody's in burnout. So we should have high levels in the morning. It's what gets us out of bed, gives us the energy to go to work and do a good day's work. If somebody has burnt themselves out because they've been pushing and not giving themselves the rest and the recuperation that they need, then slowly but surely those cortisol patterns will change. And what generally happens is that the pushing elevates the cortisol level. It gives us the energy we need because we're saying, look, I need more. So it gives us more. But that is unsustainable. And eventually our body there's a feedback loop in our system. So our system says, we're noticing cortisol levels are a little bit high. We're just going to turn down the production a little bit, just like a factory would. They wouldn't overproduce products if they weren't selling those products, right? So the production gets turned down. Then when we realize that we're in a state of burnout, we back off and find ways of healing ourselves. But then, of course, we get to the state where we've started to regain healthy patterns, but the mechanism for making that cortisol is still down-regulated. So then we're in a state where we don't have enough to create the energy that we need to get out of bed in the morning. And so then that's when we're in that stage, sort of stage 3, stage 4 of burnout, where that can be really challenging. And to come back to recover that pattern to a healthy routine again is tough, is challenging, and not one I would recommend to people. And it's something that I coach people on to help them through that challenge, whether they're healthy or whether they're elevated or whether they're flatline.
What did it look like for you when you were burnout?
Flatline. So if you imagine an XY graph, sort of 6 a.m. being bottom right and 6 p.m. being halfway across, and then the next 6 a.m. being at the far end, it should go very, very quickly, should go up. And then by about midday, it should start to trickle down like a slide in a kid's playground, because then that helps us sleep at nighttime because it's coming down. That drops down, melatonin kicks in, we fall asleep, have a good night's sleep. A disrupted pattern will probably have a higher top of the slide, and it probably won't drop down low enough to help us sleep at nighttime, so it will disrupt our sleep. Mine was just off the horizontal axis, and then it just did that until the end of the day. So it was almost unreadable. So there's a certain amount we should have in our system every day, and mine was about 10% of where it should have been, 20% of where it should have been. So I just wasn't making enough to give myself the energy I needed. So it was quite a wake-up call.
Why do you think it happened in the first place?
Partly personality and drive and wanting to prove myself. So a makeup of different things. It was a combination of pushing from a training point of view. In other words, I was doing lots of different things, competing in lots of different events. And at the same time, I was working really hard and doing crazy hours. And the two just did not go together. There was no downtime. There was no quality recuperation and recovery. And I was my own worst coach.
I mean, looking back, how would you have done it differently?
Looking back, I would have done a lot less events. So I would have spread those out instead of trying to do 3 big things in 12 months. I would have done one thing in 12 months. And then I would have looked at my calendar and gone, why are you starting at 6 a.m. and finishing at 7 p.m.? And obviously there would have been breaks during the day, but it's still a long day in a fairly physical role. And I just thought I was bulletproof. I wasn't. So yeah, those are the things I would do is be a bit smarter about what sort of activities I'm doing. And I would look at my working day and go, is that realistic? Is that sustainable?
With mindset, what was the biggest challenge that you faced in your own mindset, in your own career, and how did you overcome it?
I think changing that mindset to help myself recover was difficult. I ended up joining a local yoga class, which I'd never done yoga. My mother was a yoga teacher. And I never got into it, but I knew I needed to do something that was movement-based. So I was moving my body, but in a very gentle, restorative way. So one of the nicknames for that is working in, as opposed to working out. We all know what working out is. Working in is the opposite. So working in is movement that gives energy back to the body. So it's very low intensity. The test would be you can do it while having a conversation or on a full stomach, and you're not going to have any discomfort as a result of that. And so that was sort of my road to recovery, if you like, was getting my head around the fact that I needed to do that as opposed to what I was doing so that I could get to the place where my energy was restored and back to normal.
Because you talk a lot about health restoration, or restoring energy and vitality back into your life. So do you have a vital life? Do you have vitality? Is your energy restored?
It is now.
What?
Yeah. But one of the lessons that I had to bring with me from that recovery was, how do I make sure I don't go back there again? And part of that was, and this is quite a big mindset shift, is always keep something in the tank. So one of the examples that runners use is when they're running a race, they know the distance that they're looking for, and the advice is always keep 10% in the tank. So 10% for something that you're not expecting or a fast finish. And so the fast finish means, you might sprint the last 2 kilometers or whatever it is, or you have a detour, and that detour means you need to use up that 10%. So I tried to incorporate that into all the other things that I was doing. What can I keep in the tank? How can I look after that 10% so that it's always there? I've always got a reserve.
What does it look like? What's a 10% in real terms?
Great question. So if you think about it from a weightlifting point of view, if you're bench pressing a heavy bar and you're aiming for 12 repetitions, you would do 10. So even if you were capable of 12 and you had the strength and the endurance to get to 12, you would still stop at 10. There you go.
So that's quite the opposite of what we hear people say, that, especially my personal trainer, when I used to have one, they see, they go, okay, well, you've got 10. Can you do 2 more?
Yes.
Oh, you can do
Classic.
one. You can do 1 more.
Classic.
So what's that about?
That's about knowing your client. Some clients do need to have that little bit of encouragement to do a little bit more. And some of that is useful from a, self-belief, self-efficacy point of view. If you didn't believe you could do those extra 2, but someone encouraged you and supported you to do those extra 2, you walk away, head held high. I didn't know I could do that. And so it's really empowering.
Yeah.
But if that client is exhausted and they come to you and they just drag themselves into the room and say, I've had a heavy day and blah, 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 it's not feeling the energy, you wouldn't ask them to do that. So it's about knowing who you're working with, what their state is, and what their body really needs, and reading the room, reading the person, looking into their eyes and just looking at the body language. What are they telling you? Where are they at? Because not everybody needs that approach, but it's still a useful approach for some.
So we talked about the challenges that we have in the workplace, all the burnout, the stress, and you are there, but you're really not there. And those all are happening right now, I understand, in New Zealand.
Yeah, and I can't remember the stats off the top of my head. The last Southern Cross survey that I was looking at, but I'm fairly sure that the statistic, the percentage of that presenteeism, they used a different name and I forget what it was, but those stats have increased. So people are turning up, but only in body, not in mind and spirit.
So when you do have those conversations with them, so what's the answer to that? Like, what's the solution?
Engagement first. So engagement, as in the program that I bring, is initially about engagement. It's more about engagement than it is about education to begin with. And I think once you get that engagement, people are more receptive to listening to some of the messages that you want to share that are health related. The biggest challenge is time.
Okay.
With any of those things. So you go into an organization and there are things that they're encouraged to change. All they see is more on their list, which means, oh no, what else have I got to do? So it's helping people understand that we're looking for the 1%. We're looking for small things that add up together. And the example I always refer back to is Dave Brailsford, who took charge of the English cycle team around 2000, and he was looking for the marginal gains. So, what can we look at in terms of the pedals? What can we look at in terms of the design of the tires? What can we look at in terms of the drag? What can we look at in terms of the cyclist's sleep? So he was looking for lots of little things rather than we need new bikes. They didn't need new bikes. They just needed lots of little things to add up. And so that's the approach that I take. And that's, therefore, you can pick one small thing this week and maybe next week one other small thing. So they don't ever become insurmountable tasks. They're just, just a couple more glasses of water or just another mouthful of protein, and over time, those things add up.
From what you see, from your own experience, do you see that men are active? Enough men are active?
No, not enough. I don't think men are quite as good as their female counterparts at thinking about how they can get it into their routines, into their lives. They're very aware they need to, I think, but I don't think there's the next. So they're good at the contemplation, but they're not necessarily good at the action. And I don't know whether that is because they don't know what to do, what is the best thing to do. I think they're probably time starved as well. But I think where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
And I think, if we don't know what it is that we need to do, there are plenty of people available to help support that. But you've got to take that first step. So I think men know what they need to do, but they're not necessarily good at taking the first step. There are plenty of experts who can help with that, but they need to take that step for themselves and say, hey, look, I need some help.
What are some of the quick actions that we can do right now to boost alertness?
The best thing that you can do is get out into daylight, natural light, first thing in the morning. So there's a couple of things that will happen there. The lux. So lux, photographers know all about lux because it's a measure of light. Indoors, the level of light, even with artificial light, is very, very low. Step outside and the lux, you're talking a difference between sort of hundreds, maybe 1,000 lux to 10 or 100,000 lux. It's a significant difference. And so what it's doing is it's flooding our brains with blue light. So on the light spectrum, blue light is what creates alertness. So we get outside, flood our brains with natural light, and it kind of helps to bookend our day. So it sort of sends a signal to our brain saying, beginning of the day. So your brain then starts counting down 16 hours from there. After about 16 hours, that's when the brain's like, I've had it. It's ready for it's bedtime, basically. And so that helps wash away some of that melatonin. So melatonin being that sleep hormone that will kick in when the cortisol comes down, I've talked about before. And so it helps to get rid of that sleepiness. When sometimes you wake up and you stay indoors, you can sort of still feel a little bit sleepy mid-morning because you haven't got that natural light into the eyes. So that's the first thing to do to boost that alertness is to get outside. First morning cup of tea or cup of coffee or whatever it is, or even breakfast, see if you can do it outside.
What about the simple way to stabilize your blood sugars and you're having constant energy throughout the day?
Yeah, that's something I do bang on about quite a lot. Is getting that a consistent level of protein into your diet at the beginning of the day. So that doesn't mean you have to have breakfast. When I say beginning of the day is whenever your first meal is. Some people don't eat breakfast, and that's absolutely fine. Whatever works for them.
Is it okay not to eat breakfast?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Is it okay?
The cereal companies would disagree, but they're the ones that put the message out there that we all need to eat breakfast so they can sell more product.
So the benefits of eating breakfast versus benefits of not eating breakfast?
Depends. I'll usually use body type as an indicator because some body types can go and go and go, whereas mine, I'm one of those sorts of people that struggle to put weight on, whereas there are other people that struggle not to put weight on. They're at the other end of the spectrum. And generally, those who struggle to put weight on need to be eating more consistently, whereas somebody who may be of a body type that can drive past a bakery and put 2 kilos on, which is unfair, but that's how we're all built. They're the people that probably suit fasting or are skipping that breakfast meal than others. So it also, again, it depends on the person. So going back to your stable blood sugars, getting a decent amount of protein in that first meal will satiate you for longer. So protein being the driver of that because it's the most complex macronutrient, so it takes longer for your body to digest it. And so the longer that takes, the longer your body's working on that digestive process and slowly but surely feeding that food into your system as energy, breaking it down and using it as energy. And the longer that takes, the longer the tail from that meal in terms of stable blood sugars. So if you can run that into the rest of your day by lunchtime and you haven't probably needed a snack, you'll have a nutritious lunch. Do the same again. That takes you to dinner. You haven't snacked between meals. You don't need to, ideally. But it depends what components there are in those meals as to whether you get to a point where you got the 3 o'clock lull and you're starving and you haven't necessarily eaten the right things earlier.
Why do we get the 3 o'clock lull?
There's a couple of different components to it. One is you've had lunch, your blood sugars have gone up, which happens every meal, regardless of what you eat. It depends, it can go higher if you eat a high carbohydrate type meal. Then it drops off. It will slowly stabilize again, but generally it will go depending on the high. So the higher the high, the lower the low that follows.
Mm.
And then when it gets to a point where it's quite low, your brain will start going, hello, we need some fuel here. But there'll be a lull. There'll be that, I'll just go have a little nap. And that's around that 3 o'clock time, because that's the time it takes for you to get to that point. So that's one of the drivers. The other is dehydration. We may not have been drinking enough water from the beginning of the day. So by the time you get to about then, not only are the blood sugars quite low, the hydration levels may be below optimum, and that combination is not great. So it's a two-pronged, at least a two-pronged thing.
Well, how about the whole fasting, the intermittent fasting, and not eating at all? And what's going on here? Is it okay? Is it healthy to do that? I mean, some people can't be doing that because
There's a number of ways of looking at it, but one of the ways is that by removing, let's say it's breakfast and you just have lunch and dinner, you're immediately removing a whole bunch of calories out of your day. So if one of the goals of that person is to lose weight, then that could be a way of doing it for them. It's a bit more black and white, as opposed to going, I need to reduce my calories each meal, or just take a meal out and eat 2 other normal meals. So it can be a useful tool. The other thing that it's doing is it's improving your insulin sensitivity. By not eating for a longer period of time, your insulin sensitivity improves, which means when you do eat, you don't need as much insulin in your system to bring your blood sugars back down to a safe level. And if you go for long enough, you go into what's called ketosis. So instead of using glucose as the preferred fuel in your body and your brain, you use ketones, which is, I've forgotten the name for it because I'm on camera, but it will probably pop into my head later. But when you're using ketones as the alternative fuel, and if you think of the body as like a hybrid car, you can either use petrol or electricity to drive the car. You can either use glucose or ketones for fueling, using it as a fuel for the body. So if you go into ketosis, you've exhausted your stores of glucose and glycogen in the liver to the point where you've got none left, and so your body switches over. And people report having high levels of clarity, so their thinking is clearer. And that kind of makes sense from an evolutionary point of view. If we've gone into ketosis because food is scarce, that's the time where we need to be our sharpest, because we're looking for that next meal. Otherwise, we're not going to survive. So from an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense that our thinking would be sharper and our actions would be clearer. So that's the other benefit, that that insulin sensitivity, plus the calorie saving. So those are a couple of the benefits.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been amazing to have you. You are a wealth of knowledge, and your expertise is so high in demand right now. And I can, tell you that I've been inspired by the conversation today, and the fact that you are so passionate and keen to see people become who they're supposed to be. And I, cannot wait to see how you will grow and flourish in terms of being a health coach, a mindset coach. More and more companies will be able to flip the switch on that and have people like yourself make a huge impact in their organizations and their employees.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.